Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Well, that's what the guy says anyway. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, September 9th, 2020. It appears it is time for another show. That is what my clock, which is never wrong, says is the case. I suppose one day they could fool me into starting the show early. But, all right, we're, what are we going to say? It's always hard to just honestly say, yeah, we're ready for another show. How do I know if we're ready for another show? There's no way of knowing. Anyway, good news from the West Coast. As always, Justice Putnam chiming in this morning to tell me that everything is A-OK. I worry about it because, as I understand it, everything from, like, I don't know, what would we say, the Dakotas West is on fire. Is that accurate? I would say it certainly is accurate as the propaganda being circulated, I think, with the help probably of some, let's say, Eastern European manufacturing zones that is being circulated here in the United States, which I cannot fathom how anybody could think it would work, which is what makes me think that maybe it's like Russian in origin. Although I'm not entirely certain that the Russians even try to come up with propaganda that they think will work. They just, something that they think will circulate versus something that they think will actually work. Two different things. I just happened to catch this yesterday, but, I guess aimed at convincing people that once again, caravans of Antifa super soldiers were on their way to your home. A list of, I believe it was 28 prominent American cities, which the meme, the graphic that was circulating, argued had essentially been destroyed, looted. There were riots, and they had been basically burned to the ground. These cities were destroyed was the theme of this graphic. And they're cities you may have heard of. New York, Los Angeles, smaller cities around the country. Nashville, Fayetteville, North Carolina, Chicago, Philadelphia, some of the larger cities that maybe have crossed your news feed at some point. You've heard of them, perhaps you live in one of them, and you weren't aware that it had been burned to the ground and totally destroyed. I'm just sort of curious about what sort of person could read such a thing and fully believe that. And I don't know if anybody fully believes it. They probably just think, well, there are certain areas of the town which have been, in which there have been riots and looting, possibly general mayhem, and that maybe buildings had in fact been burned to the ground. There's very little that's been burned to the ground anywhere, with the exception of a few garbage cans or mattresses. Occasionally cars have been pretty well burnt out, but it's been a while. And it's not happening in most places. And when I saw it circulated, I did see somebody say that a friend of theirs in Indiana had contacted them just to be sure that, in fact, Washington, D.C., among the list, was not, in fact, destroyed. And they got worried. I know someone who lives in Washington, D.C., besides the president, and I'll just ask, just to make sure that it hasn't been totally destroyed. And, I don't know whether they were surprised to find out that it hadn't been totally destroyed or not, but that's what happened, because it hasn't been. And it just struck me that it was one of those weird things that why would anybody even bother passing that on? You can actually, if you're worried, you can check. There are live webcams in every one of these cities, and you can witness the destruction for yourself. Well, maybe it's being destroyed in another part of town, you might say. But again, the idea that a giant conspiracy would hide from you the total or even partial destruction of Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, Washington, Baltimore, Los Angeles, I don't know what else was on the list. I mentioned a few of those. I don't know if they got down south. Was any part of the South destroyed in this? I don't know. Well, it's all a fake thing, so I didn't really expect for you to keep up on it. But just in case you were wondering what's really happening around the country, there's no news because all major population centers in the United States have been destroyed. So, in case you were wondering about that. By the way, we could add another city to the list. Today we will be passing, I believe, in the Trump coronavirus death toll, the number of people that Donald Trump has killed with the coronavirus is now reaching the equivalent of the entire population of Tallahassee, Florida, which, as I understand it, is an important city and an important state for him during the election. And this one he might care about more. I did find that was never the point of equating the death toll to a particular city. It was never to do this. But I did have people, earnest Twitter, chiming in and telling me things like, well, for instance, if I said it was the population of, I think I chose a city in California at one point. It might have been Salinas. And I got answers about, well, the population there is largely Hispanic, and so Trump won't care about it. Well, he didn't really kill that city. The point is that it's the equivalent of their population. It's spread out throughout the United States. But, I actually had people answering me, well, call me when it gets to, thus and such a prominent white population city. And that city also is not likely to be wiped from the map. Literally speaking, it's not that, and I'm certainly not trying to tell you that Trump cares about any particular city or any particular group of people dying for his benefit. He loves it no matter who gets killed. But the point was really about the numbers, and I guess maybe that answers my question. As I've wrapped up our non sequitur of a beginning here, who could possibly believe that so many cities had been destroyed? The same sort of person, I guess, who would say, oh, I thought you said that there was actually nobody left in Tallahassee. Well, okay, so that solves our problem, and now we know who to watch out for on the internet. Watch out, there are silly people everywhere. Greg Dworkin is here, and I think will probably rescue us from this meandering, because you've got an actual list, an organized list of items you'd like to get to. Let's open it up to that now. I'll press the Greg button. There he is.
Well, it's, semi-organized. But I have to say,
okay.
It's interesting that you should mention Tallahassee, because I had two thoughts as you were saying that, to see how the human mind sometimes makes connections. I figured what would happen is that Sinclair and Fox and all the other stations would show pictures of California wildfires burning down homes, only they'd have the Chiron about this is Joe Biden's America. And at the same time, you mentioned Tallahassee. I learned from the polls over the last few weeks that, did you know this? Florida is actually competitive. It's a competitive state.
I did see that. I learned that from a pundit yesterday who revealed that he was very smart because he said ahead of time that Florida was going to be competitive, and then he had some data that said it was competitive, and he just wanted everybody to know that he had predicted that.
Right, and that's I just think pretty amazing.
But, really presented as shot chaser. I really love those presentations.
Yeah, really good.
That's just two shots.
Let's talk a little bit about polling. You mentioned riots and places burning down, so I think it's only appropriate to look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin right now, the average lead for Biden in 538 aggregate polling is 7.5, and more significantly, it's Biden 50.8 and Trump 43.3, so it's significant when you get to 50.
That is a riot. A
7-point lead when you're 37 to 30 is not the same thing as a 7-point lead when you're 50-43, just, for the record.
Okay.
And Morning Consult essentially is doing a tracking poll of Wisconsin. They're publishing every day. On September 6th, Wisconsin was +6 for Biden. September 7th, it was +8. Yesterday was +8, and today is +8. So it looks like Biden's up by 8 in Wisconsin in Morning Consult polling. Change Research has him at 6. Redfield and Wilton Strategies has him at 9. Rasmussen has him at 8. So for those people who say, well, look, all the polling is saying this gloom and doom and law and order and rioting and California wildfire stuff isn't really working in Wisconsin, the polling is supporting that.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So there was, my gosh, look at Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a lot closer than we thought. Pennsylvania is a battleground state. So there's a new Marist poll, the same one that showed Florida tied yesterday, shows Biden up by 9 in Pennsylvania today.
Huh. Oh, that's okay.
But nobody's talking about that. They only talk about the Florida one. Because we talked about this on Monday. It's only good to talk about stuff that shows the race tightening. It's never good to show about the race widening, which, in fact, in some cases it is. We'll get to that. So the Monmouth poll shows tight 1 to 3 point race. Everybody talked about that in Pennsylvania. But Marist, also an A-plus rated poll, has them up by 9. And what's the truth? Well, I don't think Marist weights by education.
Okay.
They have college educated in the mid-40s, when in fact in Pennsylvania it's closer to 36. We know this because Pew has published data on all the states, so that you have some idea of where it should be.
I guess they should weight it by the number of colleges in the state. Then it would make sense.
Well, open or closed. It's hard to know.
Oh, that's true too. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Right. So it's very difficult to do all of this polling stuff, just as a general rule.
All right. Well, life is tough. A lot of
it's going to get tougher, and I'll tell you something that makes it even tougher.
Oh, yes. Is it?
Well, who's a likely voter? These are now likely vote. It's after September 1st, so now these are all likely voter models.
Oh, yes, good, right.
Right, so they've moved from registered voters to likely voters. But who's a likely voter?
I don't even like voters, so I don't know.
Yeah, well, there you go. Tom Bonner talks about two things. We mentioned one on Monday, but it's worth going over both of them today.
Yeah. Okay.
A larger share of the Democrats requesting mail ballots in battleground states in the past week. Okay, Democrats requesting vote-by-mail ballots in battleground states in the last week. A larger share didn't vote in 16 as compared to the overall share. Huge increases in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Virginia.
Virginia.
Okay, in Wisconsin,
I thought we were all in.
Share of the 2020 Dem vote-by-mail requests in the last week filed by non-2016 voters is 15.6% of all of them. It was 12% overall. In Michigan, it's 27.3 compared to 16.9 overall. In Pennsylvania, 23.5 compared to 16.1. There's going to be a ton of I didn't vote in 2016 voters, according to this. Now, requesting it isn't the same thing as filling it out and returning. Filling it out and returning isn't all Democrat, but these are Democratic mail ballots requested, so they're probably mostly going to be Democratic. The point is there's a super hidden vote here, and that's the people who didn't vote in 2016, and likely voter screens probably miss them.
Oh, yeah. Okay, right.
Okay. The other secret voter isn't the shy Trump voter. It's the parent of school-age children voter.
They're usual
because
voters.
This is the week that all of this hits, and everybody's upset about it. I was just having a discussion with it. Well, here in Connecticut, sports are canceled, and everybody's going to blame the governor. Well, that's true. That's what governors are for. But none of them are blaming Trump. Well, that's not true because I talked to him. So I know it's certainly none. I know quite a few who say, well, and Trump isn't doing enough. So do they blame him predominantly? How do you know? Because you can find it on Facebook, and there's anti-democratic Facebook groups who are organizing around sports. That's great, but Facebook isn't necessarily the real world, sorry to say. And there's plenty of people that the canvassers go out and talk to who, in fact, are blaming Trump for this. But the fact that school and going back to school is such a big deal right now for parents continues to get overlooked by the pundits for reasons which I'm not totally sure.
Well, I have a theory, but...
and Simon Rosenberg says, I've always believed that the fall school debacle here in the U.S. could end up weakening Trump so much it would functionally end the race. Still think it's more likely than not being discussed enough in the chatter. So what's your theory?
Well, my theory has always been punditry. I usually use it to explain something else, but punditry is a lifestyle choice. And the only way you get to be a pundit is if you make yourself reliably available to television and newspapers, which generally speaking means abandoning any parenting role that you might actually have at home. And the two things are incompatible. Being in a television studio at 6:45 a.m. in a suit means you're not bringing kids to school or preparing their lunches or taking care of them if they are preparing for homeschooling during a pandemic. Pundits aren't parents, just generally speaking. They just don't overlap.
They're not doing the parenting thing, and so they don't get it. And, and I think
they may
that's
have
exactly
children,
right.
but they're not primary caretakers. It's all about their household runs in terms of I've got to be on TV or get my 1,200 words in before this time. You take care of the kids.
But most people aren't in that situation.
Right.
And in fact, most people are dealing with the pandemic in one shape or form, even if they don't want to, like the outbreak in Maine that killed 3 people and spread beyond the wedding, like the outbreak in Sturgis that spread to multiple states. And in fact, there's new data on that suggesting as many as 250,000 cases could be traced to Sturgis.
Yeah,
and
that's
that South Dakota now has the highest per capita positivity rate for testing. It's in the 20s.
Awesome.
So these things have consequences, and all of that is underlying the polling. So let's just go directly to that. This is, again, a 7.8 Biden lead nationally, if you take the aggregate from 538.
Yeah. Okay.
And looking at the national polling on this, this is just today. Leger comes out with Biden +6. Morning Consult, Biden +6. USC Dornsife has either +11 or +15, which is drifting upward toward Biden, depending upon which method of questioning you ask, traditional method or probability question. Either way, let's go with the traditional because that's more easy to understand, and that's 15 today. Ipsos is +12, so USC is not an outlier. And YouGov just came out, and it's +9, was +6. So nationally speaking, Biden's doing just fine. If anything, it's super stable, maybe leaning a little bit in his direction as the minuscule bounce from the Republican National Convention goes away. And at the same time, the military comments from Trump start to sink in with the population are now starting to get measured within the general polling of who do you support. So, it's an extremely, extremely stable lead for Biden. This may shock you if you've heard the show, that it's a stable lead, and it's been a stable lead for months. But in fact, it's a stable lead. And then when you go to the individual state polling, there's just a crap ton of it today.
Oh, boy.
So, if you just want to look at today.
They love the state
You have
polls.
Marist, again, in Pennsylvania, likely voter, Biden +9. Morning Consult, Wisconsin, 8. Texas, Morning Consult, tied. Pennsylvania Morning Consult +5. The only bad poll for Biden is in Ohio and Georgia. Morning Consult has Trump +2 in Georgia and +5 in Ohio. So Georgia and Ohio and Texas are really on the cusp of, should we spend time there? It turns out Georgia is close enough. Biden is opening up a much more robust campaign there.
Okay.
Morning Consult, Arizona, Biden +3. Colorado, Biden +6. Florida, Biden +5.
All right.
Michigan, Biden +10. Minnesota, Biden +5. North Carolina, Biden +1. North Carolina is also competitive. I don't know if you know this.
People have said it. Yes.
Yeah. And so when you take all of that together, there's more. Because Change Research also has polling. Wisconsin, Biden +6. Pennsylvania, Biden +4. North Carolina, Biden +2. Michigan, Biden +6. Florida, Biden +3. Arizona, Biden +4. And the generic ballot at USC remains Democrat +6. Overall, this is a pretty good day of polling, and it's only 9:20. We still have, in about 3 hours, the MU Law poll coming out for Wisconsin, the gold standard poll. So that'll be interesting to see as well. And you take all of that together and say, look, you have two things going on. If you want the numbers are steady for Biden, if anything, favoring him a little bit. Florida indeed is competitive. A lot of the Florida analysis is, shall we say, flawed. Okay. As one of my friends pointed out, if you gave Florida people a chance between getting socked in the jaw and a bag of gold, it would be 50-50.
That's Florida man for you.
That's Florida man for you. But the thing about Florida is that, first of all, these non-Latino polls that look at the Florida Latino Hispanic population are going to get it wrong. And the ones that do,
I see,
who tend to get it right because they're concentrating on Latino voters, okay, are pointing out that the Cuban population is coming home to the Republicans, and the non-Cuban population, Biden leads in, but not as much as Hillary did.
Okay.
Now, that's plenty of reason to spend more time trying to get them, particularly Puerto Ricans who have come from diaspora, from what's going on the island, given the hurricanes and the power situation and such.
Yes.
But
in the last 100 years.
But people do not recognize that every election is different. And that means that you can afford to lose. You don't want to, and you should work hard not to.
Yes.
But you could afford to lose some of the Latino vote if, in fact, you make it up with white seniors, because the Anglo vote in Florida is still pretty big.
Yes. They're all over the place.
Biden is doing much better with seniors than Hillary did. So each election is a different coalition. And Florida, of course, being like 7 different states all packed into one state.
Yes.
The state of Miami-Dade is not the same as the state of the Panhandle, which is a different state than the state in the middle of the state, with Disney World and Orlando and such.
True.
So we're all different. So things that play well one place won't play well in the villages, and they won't play well somewhere else. So when you gain something with one of these mini states, you're going to lose something with somebody else. So the whole point is to put together a winning coalition, and this year's coalition may look different than 2016. So just looking at, this is how Biden is doing compared to Hillary doesn't tell you the full story. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And smart analysts who know Florida much better than me have certainly pointed this out, from Steve Shale to Armando to everybody else who actually knows the state. And so, there's plenty of work to be done. But given the fact that Florida is competitive, if you get a poll that says Florida is competitive, don't freak out, because guess what? Florida is competitive. And if you look in the subheadings there, and assuming they're even accurate, and you get a signal that Biden isn't doing as well as Hillary did with X group, that may be true, and that's worth spending time on, and you should work hard, but it's not the whole story. It's
especially
only
if they're gettable.
Part of the elephant. You got to look at the whole elephant to get a whole picture of what's going on.
Yes. Okay. Right.
And when you do, Florida's competitive.
Great. Would you like to be a pundit?
No. It's just it seems like it's too hard.
Yeah. Well, don't worry about it. It's
I don't know anything about all this polling analysis.
So what?
But, Florida's competitive. It always is. Oh, okay. Well, you're right again.
Yeah. Congratulations. Okay.
That's
so.
The 17 keys to the president race. I have one key to Florida. It's going to be competitive.
Right.
Every year I'm right.
You're going to be on the money with that one. Okay. So good. Is Florida competitive?
So I hear.
Okay. Just wanted to wrap that up.
Right.
I think we got it.
Anyway, the whole interest in newer voters coming in is just going to be fascinating. And of course, vote by mail requests are not the same thing as filling out the ballot and returning it, and we don't know who they voted for. And the point here is actually a lot subtler than just, we have a lead. Yes, we understand that means that if it's true that we have a lead, that you have to build on that, but that the Republicans are going to be same-day voting. So we don't really know what it means in terms of the final result. But it also means that for campaigns, these are banked votes that aren't going to change. And you don't have to spend a lot of resource going after them, because they're done. If you get a big lead with the people who you think are going to turn out, that gives you a couple of weeks to spend your resources on the marginal people who you want to turn out.
Yes.
That's a help to the campaign.
Folks. True.
Whereas the Republican campaign still has to concentrate on everybody because they're waiting for the last minute on everybody.
Yeah. And I guess there's always the possibility that Trump will, say, I hate the military.
The military.
And,
right.
Wow. All
Which,
right.
by the way, is day 7 of the story that everybody told me was going to be a 24-hour thing.
Yeah. Well,
and today's extension of the
24.
story, yesterday's was Trump complaining about it. Today's is Meghan McCain saying she believes the report that Trump called fallen soldiers losers.
What?
Because how could you not believe it? And, David Frum had a really nice piece. I have this in the Pundit Roundup. Everybody knows it's true. That's the title of his story in The Atlantic.
Yeah.
As Trump vehemently disputes reports that he's disparaged veterans, some silences speak loudly, and he talks about the fact that it isn't a question of John Kelly coming in and saying it's true. It's that wounded warriors, Gold Star families, service families, they're not coming out and saying it's false.
That's true. There aren't very many defenders.
It's resounding
that aren't on his
silence.
payroll.
And when such voices do speak, they typically describe a president utterly lacking in empathy to grieving families, wholly uncomprehending of sacrifice and suffering. I mean, the thing is, you can play games about, it's uncorroborated, so actually it's corroborated. Well, it's not on the record. Well, it doesn't need to be on the record because you know what? Everybody knows it's true. And there's plenty of stuff that's on the record that corroborates it. And everything you said about John McCain is on the record.
But what if he starts saying that it's off?
Yeah, what if all of a sudden he changes and becomes a different person? See, that's
right.
Good. Go with that one if you want.
He could pivot. That sounds ridiculous when you say it, but if you had said pivot, that would sound savvy and pundit-like.
Pundity,
yeah,
right? Then I could be a pundit too.
Sure.
Anyway, so again, to get a sense of what's going on here, let's just spend the last minute here going over this NBC News Marist poll of Pennsylvania, because I think it is kind of interesting.
Right.
The survey finds that Biden and Harris get the support of 53% of likely Pennsylvania voters. Again, it's one thing to have a lead. It's another thing to have a lead over 50%, compared with 44% who back Trump and Pence. Remember, Trump's 44%. That's all he gets. Biden goes up and down. Sometimes he's 49, sometimes he's 51. But Pence and Trump are stuck at 44.
Okay.
Right? He gets upside-down job approval, although he still maintains an advantage on handling the economy. And Biden's doing far better among suburban voters and whites than Clinton did 4 years ago. That's why looking just at the Florida Latino voters, as important as it is, doesn't tell you the whole story. 45% of likely voters say they approve of the job the president's doing, while 52% disapprove, and just 44% have a favorable impression of Trump, while 54% have a negative one. And Biden has a net positive in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So with Trump's job approval rating and favorability upside down, he needs to reshuffle the deck to close the gap. And that's really the bigger message here. Biden has this lead, and so it's stable, and that's fine. But what it also means is that Trump is losing, and unless he does something different, he's going to continue to go on and lose.
Yeah, so pivot. I mean, that's the obvious answer, isn't it?
I thought you said divot. He went golfing.
That could be it, right. That finally explains what he's doing.
There's the big divot we've been waiting for from Trump.
Right. Today's the day he finally became what? I'll try to think of something that sounds like it.
You know.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com.
Fellow that we follow.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're anxious to get started, so let's just run right into it. We don't care about professionalism. What's the point? All right.
What is the point? So Kevin Cate is a progressive media guy, consultant, and ad maker.
Well, who is?
Kevin Cate. C-A-T-E.
Oh, okay. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin. And he has posted a video, watch behind the scenes how he filmed a political spot during COVID-19 safely with masks in 100-degree North Florida heat.
Ooh.
So he's actually doing a political ad.
Okay.
And showing people how it's made and the work they have to do in order to keep safe.
All right.
And it's just a little micro example of how dominating the pandemic is about everything, whether you're covering it or not, whether you're a pundit or not, whether you think it's the story or not. It is. It affects everything, including even how you film stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. Well, certainly if you have to be on microphone and you've got a thing over
Here's
your
another
face,
example.
you're in
This is
trouble.
a baseball story.
Baseball.
In the Washington Post.
All right.
Baseball has never been so lonely, and players are feeling the strain.
Boo-hoo.
Okay.
I don't know what to say.
During normal times, there are aspects to a major league season that don't lend itself to top-notch mental health. Work every day, travel constant, struggling for everybody to see. It's a team sport, but there's no overstating the potential for isolation. And now here comes along coronavirus.
Spitting all over the place. Yeah.
It's almost like, where do you start? Washington Nationals reliever Sean Doolittle said, I often joke, but I think I'm serious about taking some psychology classes over the winter. It's been that tough, said Washington manager Dave Martinez.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be wise.
Let's get this part out of the way before everybody gripes. Everybody's talking about these issues, and they understand how fortunate the players are.
Yeah.
Right? They're staying in the best hotels, 60-game season. They make more money than almost all of us. Many advantages, but we understand, and we have to understand, mental health issues can affect anyone regardless of their means. They show no biases, baseball included. That includes doctors, that includes lawyers, that includes politicians, that includes baseball. It's everybody. So,
yeah, all right.
The coronavirus just makes it worse.
Yes.
And so, again, you can be a political consultant who says, okay, well, putting this aside,
all right.
Putting coronavirus aside, how do things stand?
What?
You can't.
Okay.
Because you can't put it aside.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense. Are the baseball players spitting the way they always do during coronavirus? I haven't been watching. I mean, it's not even really a part of the game that most people watch, but just thinking about sitting in a dugout with people spitting all over the place as they usually do and thinking, hey, something.
So, again, just
don't do that.
It's another little piece to remind people that it's really part and parcel of everything. It's part and parcel of the entire life feeling as you go on from day to day to day, because, firstly, don't forget about it, and secondly, it's garbage pickup.
So she saw a virus. Okay, well, garbage pickup is important, but it's a part of everybody's everyday life. Obviously, I think it's obvious.
Well, Abby's not depressed about it. She actually likes Scott, who comes and picks up our garbage, because Scott always has treats for her. So she gets really upset when we don't let her out. But, of course, he has a very big truck, and he backs up, and I'd really rather have her in the house.
Yeah, I can't. All right, well.
All things being equal.
She's getting treats one way or the other, either out of the garbage or from the garbage man.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so, I just see this tweet from G. Elliott Morris that came by. Today's polls so far are pretty good for Biden. He's +9 in Pennsylvania for Marist, +12 nationally in both USC Tracker and Ipsos, and up broadly across the swing states, according to Morning Consult and Change Research. And there are more sunny numbers for him to come.
Oh. All right. Well, that doesn't just mean in a sunny state, right?
Within a 50% for him, which is one of the things perhaps that he was talking about. In fact, in the YouGov poll, it's 52 to 43. So that 9-point lead, again, when you're above 50, is certainly good. And G. Elliott Morris said, no, not YouGov, even higher.
Oh.
So we'll see.
All right. Let's see. So, all right, G. Elliott Morris. All right, I'll look for that one. Sunny. There we go. Got it.
There you go.
Okay.
So while all this is happening,
yes.
Trump is doing his stump stuff.
His what?
Showing up in large crowds at airports, even though it's banned in the states that he's doing this in.
Yeah.
Most people not wearing masks. Creating super spreader events, just
cops.
like Sturgis. That's what he's doing.
Yay.
And the New York Times and others continue to lead their stories with the ridiculous headline of Trump says X, even though Trump says X is almost guaranteed to be a lie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. Always.
Reed Richardson, who is currently a writer-editor at Mediaite, says he called out this journalistic malpractice years ago, and the press still does it. Hard to find a better example of the media learning nothing about its own manipulation by Trump. And he's got a whole story here. Trump says the journalistic scourge of echo chamber headlines, which I thought was kind of interesting because it fits in with a theme that you and I often go over. So let me just give you that for your later, too, because I thought that was interesting and certainly notable. And that's something that we absolutely, positively should pay attention to. But let's spend a little bit of time talking about that big dominating thing, and that's the coronavirus. First of all, as you may have heard, AstraZeneca says their study was put on hold due to suspected adverse reaction in a participant in the United Kingdom, which was the phase 3 study that they're doing right now. A spokesperson for AstraZeneca, frontrunner in the race for a COVID-19 vaccine, this is from the Pundit Roundup, said in a statement that the company's standard review process triggered a pause to vaccination to allow review of safety data. It was not immediately clear who placed the hold on the trial, though it was possible it was placed voluntarily by AstraZeneca and not ordered by a regulatory agency.
Okay.
The nature of the adverse reaction and when it happened were also not immediately known, though the participant is expected to recover, according to an individual familiar with the matter. And this has profound implications. First of all, this is why you can't rush things. This is normal to happen. in any phase 3 trial. Something happens, you're not sure what it is, you stop, you go back and you look, and then you decide whether it's like, it's absolutely from what we're doing, we can't continue, or it's not at all clear, or it could have been coincidence, or there's some other explanation. And you only know that after looking, and that's why you go slowly on these things and you wait for the phase 3 trials to finish.
All right.
Okay. Here's another example. There was a piece, Eric Topol, cardiologist, pointed out, there's a piece published yesterday, no benefit of convalescent plasma in a randomized trial of 464 patients. You may recall that the FDA, Stephen Hahn and Trump made this big splash of saying they're doing an EUA, an emergency use authorization for convalescent plasma because it's a game changer. It turns out it's not. Stephen Hahn lied about the data when he presented it. They had to pull that back. And it turns out it's not really all that helpful, just like hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, although it seemed intuitively to maybe be a better bet.
Well, remember, we told you about Craig Spencer, the Ebola doctor who took the L train to Brooklyn, and how he got convalescent plasma and got sicker from it. And we know that there's a whole lot of things that people do that say work, when it turns out, and you look at the studies, they actually don't do all that much, because placebo effect is not only powerful, but you're usually doing 9 other things, and you got to tease out what helped and what didn't help. So the bottom line is that all of these breakthroughs aren't the breakthroughs that they appear. And what they do is they cast even more doubt on the credibility, not just of Trump, but of the people around him. We have the companies themselves, like AstraZeneca, writing a statement, a 9-company shared statement that we're not going to rush this. We have people within the administration saying if they rush it, we'll resign. And then we now have this new piece from AstraZeneca saying they had to slow the trial down because of investigating what they're supposed to be investigating, which is why they do safety trials in the first place. And all of that adds up to, I don't care what Trump says, we're not getting a vaccine before the election.
But all he has to do is say...
We can get an announcement before the election, but that's like announcing that Burisma is going to do a look into what's going on with Biden. He wants the announcement desperately, but he can't have the vaccine. And most people don't trust him at this point, so it doesn't do him much good.
Right. And back to your theme. That's the reason why he's banking on Trump says headlines. If the headlines were Trump is talking out his ass or lying, or there's
Same
no
thing
way...
with the Barr-Durham report. So Barr goes ahead and he says that, remember that lady who's suing Trump for rape? Well, the Trump campaign is out of money, and they use the Trump campaign to pay for all the legal fees, so the Department of Justice will do it. We'll use taxpayer money for it because, of course, there's no justification, but I'm Bill Barr, so I can do this.
Right.
Fine. So he does that, and then he's going to turn around and say, but here's the Durham report, which is totally non-partial.
Yes. We're on the up and up here. Yeah. All right. Good. Well, I'm glad we're ready for that. And I see, was it Kurt Eichenwald, I think, has been running around. He's got a prediction, I guess. And I think we're 7 days from the day he predicts that report drops. So we'll see whether he's right or not. And he loses his pundit card if he's wrong, I think. But okay, keeping an eye on that. Thank you. So, we've got a week to...
But it's only September. How can you drop an October surprise in September?
Too many things for October. They want to space it out a little bit and mail-in voting, and they're concerned about people...
they're mailing in their surprises because I don't think they're going to have the impact that they think they're going to have.
No, that's the surprise, I suppose.
Yeah. So, the October surprise is that these October surprises aren't really working. The October surprise is going to be the hidden vote of parents who are trying to deal with schools wrestling with outbreaks because there's mini Sturgises like in every state now because of this.
Yeah.
And if it's not at the grade schools, it's at the colleges.
True.
And I know you're affected both ways, and I'm so sorry. I don't mean to rub it in, but this is difficult, and the idea that it's going away is just stupid.
Yeah, true. They're doing relatively well down at college. Count continues to drop.
Yeah, this is not everybody's going to die. It's that these are issues, and even if there is no outbreak, it's worrying parents, and they're going to take that with them everywhere they go.
You're checking it every morning. And,
exactly.
That's bad news. You want to be thinking about, I don't know, what am I supposed to be doing? I'm supposed to be shopping or participating in the economy or something.
Right. So Edward Isaac DeVere was covering Trump's statements about the vaccine. And one of the reporters said to him, something along the lines of, but I thought you said that, there's going to be a vaccine soon.
To Trump, okay.
And Trump said, Trump, whose truthfulness is again in question, says, "You're not quoting me accurately. I didn't say what you said. What I said is by the end of the year, but I think it could even be sooner than that. It could be during the month of October, actually. It could be before November." You got that?
Was he saying?
Because the question was,
yeah,
everybody says there won't be a vaccine before the election, but you keep saying there might be.
Okay,
and Trump says, "No, you're not quoting me accurately. I didn't say what you said. I said by the end of the year, but I think it could be even sooner."
Yeah, I guess I don't know if he. It's hard to decide whether I think Trump thinks that's
Edward
different.
Isaac, of your summary of what you just heard. Okay.
All right.
So today, as President Trump says he didn't say what verified sources say he said, says he didn't say what he just said in front of a crowd of reporters and cameras, and gets angry that he's not being believed about what he says he said, even though he just said something else.
Yes.
And or, it wasn't as I put it, Mickey Mantle to Congress, I agree with what Casey said.
Okay. I mean, he's just... And I don't know whether that's mental decline. I just think he never got that. He never
this is BS from a con artist trying to not get pinned down and be held responsible. Remember, he's not responsible for anything, including what he says.
Yeah. That's
so
true.
when you challenge him on what he says, he's going to say, "I didn't say that. Let me just repeat what I just said that you said I didn't say."
That's amazing. Well, he's not smart.
It's a gish gallop. It's nonsense, and you have to cover it as such. And that's why you go back to what I just said before. Trump says X is a lie to begin with.
Yeah. So don't bother.
That's you trying to normalize him. He's not a normal president. Despite his past comments to the contrary, Trump says is a much better headline.
Yeah.
If you want to be neutral. And that's a neutral thing to say because it's true.
True also. And, like we keep telling people, if you can't come up with any other formulation, putting purports or purportedly and everything, I think, is a great hint, although maybe not enough people understand what purportedly means.
Yeah, we'll just put despite.
Yeah, I guess that'll do it. That's easier.
Every Trump saying has to have despite in it, because you could find a despite.
Yes.
There are plenty of despites. Whatever it is.
Everyone knows what it is
Despite what he
and what
just
it
said,
means.
he just said something else.
That's bad, right? Despite. Okay. Yeah, that'll solve it too. That's incredible. I'm just thinking about him standing there and saying, "I didn't say that maybe there would be. I said that there might be."
I said there wouldn't be, but there might be.
Okay. So I guess in his mind,
he's because I didn't say there would be. I said there might be.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess he thinks that. The only thing I can think of from him is he
thinks that's clever.
He thinks that he has hedged his bet clearly by saying that there also might not be.
This is the fourth grader arguing with the teacher.
Yeah. All right. And, all your lives are into balance. Whatever.
Exactly. Stan Greenberg, American prospect. How Trump is losing his base.
Might lose his base.
Focus groups with working class and rural voters show the deep health care crisis in America and trouble for Trump's reelection. Okay, they're talking with mostly low-wage families, many with children raised by a single parent. I mean, think of Wisconsin, the fact that all the dairy farmers are going bankrupt.
Oh.
Right? You can't talk your way out of that. They're consumed with rising opioid deaths and disabilities and a deadly expensive healthcare system. That was a big part of why they voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Remember Stan Greenberger's the Macomb County Reagan Democrat guy who identified that phenomenon way back when. So he could end Obamacare and its costly mandate and deliver affordable health insurance for all. That was his promise.
Sure.
When he failed to do so, many voted against the Republicans in the midterms. But the pandemic was the perfect storm. I've never seen such a poignant discussion of the health and disability problems facing families and their children, the risks they faced at work, the prospect of even higher health care and prescription drug costs. The final straw was a president who battled not for, quote, the forgotten Americans, end quote, but for himself, the top 1%, and the biggest, greediest companies. And that's why most in the Zoom focus groups pulled back from President Trump. 3/4 of those voters supported Trump in 2016, but less than half plan to vote for him now. And again, it's not that you convinced everybody. It's that Trump's margins in the battleground states was so razor thin he can't afford any loss at all from any of these groups. And that's, again, why the military comments come into play so strongly. Okay. It's not that it's going to change everybody. Changes 1%. That's the margin of difference of winning and losing in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida.
Yeah.
Well, and North Carolina, I would add, another military state, and Arizona, where the McCain stuff isn't going to play well.
True.
Just
how about the coal miners? How are the coal miners doing? Isn't he giving them what they want to?
The coal miners in Minnesota in the Iron Range, that's iron ore there,
is that coal?
are not really favorable to Democrats. But the problem is Trump keeps promising them that these mining jobs are going to come back, and they're not. And it's a question of when they figure it out. Plus, of course, they're outnumbered by the people in the Minneapolis
True also.
and Twin Cities suburbs.
Coal miners not out. Well, they are outnumbered just because there aren't really that many people working in coal mining, but their votes and those who vote like them aren't necessarily outnumbered in the Appalachian coal.
Well, I think Trump's still
stores.
going to carry West Virginia.
Yes,
but
I would imagine so.
that's
It's
not
light.
really going to change the election.
It's easy to carry. And it's got a wheel at the bottom, so it works. So, all right. Well, I'm just sort of wondering about that and pondering what's happening with the coal miners who got everything they wanted, including their jobs back. And there's not enough of them, I suppose. That's all. Okay.
Right.
Putting them on record.
Let me finish by
Sure.
just saying that all of this is the background to the polling. And Biden's doing fine in the polling. He's steady. That's important when you have a lead. A lot of the stuff's over 50%. Looks like at this point he's going to win. He's certainly the favorite, 75%. Actually, let's put some numbers on it because Nate Silver had a very funny quote. He said last evening, we ran 12 updates to our model today. And here's how Biden's odds changed over the course of the day. Riveting stuff.
Okay.
Nate tweeted, riveting stuff.
I'm going to rivet it.
71% overnight, 72% 6 a.m., 72% 7 a.m., 72% 10 a.m., 72% 10:30, 72% 10:50, 71% 1 p.m., 71% 1:20, 72% 4 p.m., 71% 6 p.m. Riveting stuff. Changing everything.
Okay.
It went from 71 to 71 over 12 iterations over the course of the day. This is
I
a
would've
stable
stopped at
race,
11.
folks. Don't get bent out of shape by one individual poll here and there.
I guess not. I mean, you can, if it's your job to run 12 iterations, then I guess you can do it. Get bent out of shape. What was he going for there?
He's trying to tell you that just because there was a Florida poll from Marist that said the race is tied, it didn't change the context of the race.
I mean, what iterations was he? What was he doing? What was the change?
Florida.
Just how it. Okay.
And it didn't change. It didn't change anything because guess what?
Right.
Florida's competitive. Duh.
Okay. Well, suppose so. Okay. Well, thank God he's the one that gets paid to do that because I would fall asleep.
Yeah, so does G. Elliott Morris. So they have their two competing polls. And just for grins, let's take a look and see where they're at this morning.
All right.
Okay.
Biden
is favored to win the election 71% this morning.
71.
28% for Trump. That's actually Trump dropping a bit.
Okay.
And in the Economist one that G. Elliott Morris runs, we have Biden winning 83% of the time and Trump winning 17%. So it's somewhere between 71 and 83.
The liberals at The Economist are cheating on behalf of Biden.
Right. Over the past couple of days, that's really not changed all that much. It's a little bit down from mid-August when the chance of winning was closer to 88-12. Right now it's 83-17. I would argue that's really not much of a change. And it's not really that different than Nate's model, which is why it's fun to see them argue about it.
Okay. Well, just once would be enough for them to argue about it, just per day, not 12 times.
Yeah, well, there's 12 iterations of the argument, so that's important.
Because there have to be if you keep changing things.
Right. So, since I'm there anyway, let's take a look. Pennsylvania, currently Biden has a 5.1 aggregate lead. And the Pennsylvania polls today.
Today. They're not even done.
Where Change Reachers, Biden 4, Morning Consult, Biden 5, and Marist either, let's do likely voters, +9. And here's an interesting thing about the Marist poll. Registered voters were +8 for Biden, likely voters +9 for Biden, perhaps incorporating the fact that you have all these new voters. But the likely voter models typically are a little bit less favorable to Democrats, but not this year. So the difference between the likely voter and the registered voter is pretty non-existent.
Can you work your way into, in a live interview, into a likely voter scenario? I've not voted in the past 2 elections, but there's no chance. I can't stand it. I can't wait for an opportunity. Do they let you argue your way
in
in?
live voting? There is a section for that.
Okay.
Although it's not often big enough to say too many things, but a lot of the bigger polls can tell you, oh, and of the people who we're looking at right now, X% didn't vote in 2016.
Okay. Well, it'd be interesting to figure that out. I wonder whether the broader discussion of and acceptability, despite what the president has to say about it, of voting by mail is getting people who are saying things like, I really can't take it anymore with this Trump thing, but God, voting, the whole exercise just has always disgusted me. But I understand how everybody's voting from home. They're getting them. If I could do it through the mail, I would do that. Maybe that's it. I don't know whether that's a bigger driver of it, or a significant driver of it alongside, coronavirus, which is a big driver of everything. But I'm wondering whether we've normalized the idea of voting by mail. This time everybody has the ability to do it. No excuse necessary. I'll get one of those. Plus coronavirus. So I don't know. I'm just curious about whether that's drawing more people out, or in combination, I guess, with Trump being horrifically bad. That's got to have something to do with it.
Yeah, well, everything has something to do with everything, because people don't usually say, oh, it's this one thing.
Right, that's true.
It's generally not the case. It's like a combination of everything. So that's what I'll leave you with, and then we'll talk more tomorrow. We'll have even more polls and more fun.
Right.
So, just remember, life goes on even without polling, and there's a lot of stuff underlying this that matters, and we'll talk about all of that. And as for Florida, never get upset about a Florida poll.
Okay,
Florida's going to be competitive no matter what the polls say. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
You too. All right. You don't want to stick around and do another iteration of this whole thing?
We'll do it 12 times.
Okay, yeah. Then I'll have a Friday.
Oh, the heck with it. We'll do it live.
Right. Just 24 hours around the clock.
Wait, we did.
That's true. We did do it once. Okay. 1 out of 12, Ampad. Thanks, Greg.
We'll do it Bill O'Reilly style. We'll do it live.
Right. And we won't have any idea.
Until the podcast. When you have the podcast, it's not live anymore.
It is. We're saying it is. If people believe
Kagro X says, that's what the headline says.
Right. Yeah. This broadcast is live
Kagro
right
X
now.
says this.
Right. Yeah, you've downloaded this podcast, but no, this is live. We'll see whether people believe it. I'd like that.
I'd like that too. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Very good. All right. Go collect some more news, and I'll do the same. Let's see. Up in Pocket. Oh, I guess I want to keep one eye on our Twitter feed, which, of course, I'm reminded, hey, I forgot right away, right off the bat, forgot to send around Bill's morning tweets. Oh, I'm going to get around to doing that now. What has he got to say? Oh, yes. Well, he says that there's a presidential election going on. We did cover that. And that Trump is broke and out of money. We did get to that, too. All right. Just wanted to make sure that I was on track with what Bill said we were going to do. Deliver on his promises. It's a dangerous proposition. I wonder what's coming next. Okay. Let's see. Over in Pocket. Yeah, we ought to get to, why not spend a little bit of time just before the break, I guess, on the big legal news from yesterday. And I think it was Bloomberg. And who else had a big write-up on this, too, yesterday? Let me dive back in. Was it only Bloomberg? I guess maybe that was it. And I was thinking of, there was a weird URL that went along with it. But okay, Bloomberg, Bob Van Voris, with a V, and Eric Larson wrote this up, and it was splashed all over Twitter yesterday. U.S. seeks to defend Trump in rape accusers' defamation suit. I guess we can get to the full reading of the article after the break. Oh, actually, it's not all that long. And we do have that extra minute here. Let's run through this, and then we'll talk about the implications if we can't fit those in. Skip the bullet points here and get down to the U.S. Justice Department is seeking to take over the defense of President Donald Trump in a defamation suit. It's important to get all this detail to you if you didn't soak it in already. Justice Department seeking to take over a defense of the president in a defamation suit brought by advice columnist E. Jean Carroll, who claims Trump raped her 2 decades ago. So if you're thinking, well, why would the Justice Department defend the president in what he did 2 decades ago, well before he was president? You'd have a valid question. Of course, following the posture of the case here, what we're talking about is Carroll says that the president raped her 2 decades ago, but during this decade and this year, while he was president, Trump denied that that was the case and said that she was a big liar, and she's suing him for defamation. That all did happen while he was president. So that's, I guess, the slender reed to which the DOJ is clinging, like legally speaking. There's no real reason to believe that it will work. And I guess the message I wanted to get across here is there's 2 things going on here. One, Donald Trump is ordering Bill Barr to do these things that the Department of Justice ordinarily would never even approach thinking about. And 2, no, in a normal world anyway, it's not likely to work, but it depends on what the definition of work actually is. Do I think that there are lots of people in the Department of Justice who think that the courts will say, yes, it's okay for the Justice Department to do this because the president, who is alleged to have defamed her, did so while he was president and in his capacity as president? No, it's not likely to work, but if the goal is to delay things and delay proceedings in the case such that there's no definitive answer before Election Day, that can work. And I think probably that's what they're aiming at here, because there's really no other explanation for this ludicrous theory that everything Republicans believe it, I guess, when it's necessary to believe it, that everything the president does is unique and special. And insofar as holding him accountable for something legally, well, while the president is Trump, and that situation most likely means that Trump has done something horrible and wrong and illegal, and we ought to be able to hold him to account for it. They need to expand on the theory that you can't hold the president accountable for anything. That doesn't really comport with what the old OLC, the infamous OLC memo, says about those things. And you may remember that President Clinton, Bill Clinton, was held accountable for plenty of things, depending on your definition of accountability. But we'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's get through a straight-ish read of the relatively short article here in Bloomberg. Once again, setting things up. We'll return to the analysis in just a second. The U.S. Justice Department is seeking to take over the defense of Trump in a defamation suit brought by Jean Carroll, who claims Trump raped her 2 decades ago. Now, the move, they note, could further delay a suit in which Carroll is demanding potentially damaging evidence from Trump during the final weeks before the presidential election, including a deposition, and traditionally he's been pretty bad at depositions, and a DNA sample, and no one wants to think about that, to compare to a dress that she claims she was wearing at the time of the alleged attack. And there's all sorts of proof issues involved in that, of course, but taking her at her word, Trump doesn't, taking her at her word, this means they'll have to test it against, I guess, current DNA, and nobody wants to be involved in that if you're looking to escape culpability. And particularly this president, yada, yada, evangelicals love him, et cetera, et cetera. They'll ignore anything, I guess. But, bad news for him. Anyway, perhaps even more disturbing, it could also leave taxpayers on the hook for any damages awarded in the case. I'm not certain that it really comes around to that. And that's probably the most far-fetched of the theories of the case. But if the Trump theory of the case prevails, I guess that's possible. In a court filing Tuesday, the Justice Department said Trump was acting, quote, within the scope, unquote, of his job as president when he said Carroll lied about the incident, prompting her lawsuit. I don't really know why that would be within the scope of his job as president, to point out who's lying about things, particularly when they pertain to his personal behavior well before he was president, of course. But I suppose it's within the scope of employment of a president to comment on accusations that are lobbed at him. But ordinarily we expect normal people who are president to say things like either, well, I'm not going to comment on that because it's an ongoing, case, or to say, well, obviously, I deny that categorically and there's really not much more to say. about that. You don't have to stick around and say, and she's a stupid liar and I hate her guts. That's not really within the scope of the job as presidency. But this president thinks it is. That means he makes a daily practice of it. So I suppose you could say, well, the Department of Justice is just observing reality. And after all, there's so many headlines all over the place of how Trump is redefining the role of the presidency and the scope of the presidency and the powers of the presidency. So why not just say he's just reinvented that too? No one has ever thought that that was within the scope of the job of the president before, but they haven't been a super president like Trump. And there may never be another one again. And we could turn that into a vow. Now, may there never be another one like him ever again. Okay. So let's see. The U.S., that is the Justice Department, also moved the case to Manhattan federal court from a New York state court, where a judge last month denied the president's request to stall the suit. So that's interesting all by itself. And is that a done deal, or is that still pending a decision? Removal of the case. If you file a case in state court, but the parties can, or at least one of the parties can convince the judge that there are more weighty federal issues at stake than there are state issues, you can remove the case from state court and into federal court. The idea used to be, of course, that you might have a better chance somehow. I don't really know why this was the assumption, but a better chance somehow at an impartial ruling from a federal judge than a state judge. And I guess maybe that springs from maybe not an inaccurate realization that not all state judges come to sit on the bench as a result of their rigorous review of their judicial temperament and demeanor and record, as used to once arguably be the case for federal judges in the past. And now, of course, the Trump bench is easily as corrupt and incompetent as any state bench was ever feared to be. So maybe it's time to, I guess, another one of the piece of fallout from the Trump administration. And that could lead me to another story that I have in pocket here. We'll see about whether we can follow it up with this. But another thing we're just going to have to reevaluate entirely in light of the Trump administration, the assumption that a federal trial will bring you better, fairer, more transparent results than a state trial. Interesting. Mike Musson, by the way, commenting at the moment, and it's been a while, so glad to hear from you again, Mike. I think the point of DOJ taking over this case is primarily delay, but also the government can't be sued for defamation. So if that judge accepts the argument, then the case gets dismissed. I guess that's a possibility too, right? You're suing, although the fact that the government takes over his defense, yeah, well, I mean, I guess any theory is possible. So I guess we'll have to watch out for that one. So maybe an early call there. We'll keep that in mind. Everybody file that away. So where were we? Yes, right. The U.S. also moved the case to Manhattan federal court, from state court, where a judge denied his request to stall the suit. So now I'll bring it to federal court, where we might be able to lean on the judge or get a favorable judge or scream at the judge and threaten him somehow if he also denies Trump's request to stall the suit. And also, of course, now just this move, the very controversial idea that the Department of Justice ought to be allowed to represent the president in this case will require mini litigation of its own, and that will serve to stall the suit, even if the federal judge never agrees, never agrees, and with the state court judge and says he won't. Right? Okay. All right. Well, or that he will. I suppose it renders the necessity of the federal judge ruling more favorably moot if all you need to do is stall for the next 8 weeks or so in order to get what you want. Okay. So, back to the story. Today's actions demonstrate that Trump will do everything possible, including using the full powers of the federal government, to block discovery from going forward in my case before the upcoming election, to try to prevent the jury from ever deciding which one of us is lying, Carroll said in a statement on Tuesday. It's not clear why the Justice Department is only now seeking to take over Trump's defense of the suit. That is a big question, which was filed in November of 2019. Trump, who has denied he raped Carroll, as many rapists do, has been represented in the case by his longtime outside lawyer, Mark Kasowitz. The lawyer didn't immediately return new phone calls and email messages seeking comment. The Justice Department also didn't immediately return an email. Kasowitz's name came up in the review we read the other day of how much money Trump has, how much campaign money Trump has diverted to legal defenses. So he's only too happy to get more. But I suppose now he's, either he's worried about not getting even more from the campaign, Kasowitz says, or if he read the article that says, well, the Trump campaigns are out of money, so they won't be able to pay me anymore. So I'm just as happy to hand this case off to the DOJ. Let them pay for it, which means, of course, you're paying for it. So that's one theory of the case, by the way, that in addition to wanting the delay, he's looking to transfer the billing over to the federal taxpayers as opposed to paying it out of his. That's actually the first best thing for Trump, not even wasting his campaign money on it. But another good point, it's not clear why the Justice Department at this point, nearly a year later, just realized, oh, hey, this could have been within the scope of his employment as president of the United States. I just heard that he was president of the United States. Of course, I guess one of the things that's different is, was Bill Barr Attorney General already in November of 2018? It's been a while now, but I tend to keep thinking of him as the new Attorney General. But maybe he hadn't yet solidified his control of the Justice Department by that point, and he might have been relatively new. I'll just check up on it here, and I think Wikipedia will display it in the nice little box here. Yeah, okay. Assumed office February 14th, 2019. So by November, he should have been pretty firmly in control at that point. I don't really know what took him so long. Okay, but I guess that just adds to the mystery and makes it a tougher case to make when and if they actually get to federal court about this. I assume a good federal judge will say, I don't understand why now you've decided to intervene. Although I really do understand why you've decided to intervene now. It's to delay this case, and I either will or won't allow that to happen, except that since that ruling isn't going to come anytime in the next couple of weeks, you, by default, will have allowed it to happen, and that's why the strategy is so attractive to Trump. Even if you lose, you win. So, let's see. Now on to the section about campaign spending. The move comes as the Trump campaign has reportedly been facing a cash crunch due in part to its spending on legal fees defending suits against the president. According to the New York Times, Kasowitz has been paid more than $820,000 from campaign funds, though it's not clear if that money was related to his work on Carroll's suit. I mean, he also worked, I think, didn't he also do some impeachment work? I can't recall. But that article that we read the other day laid out what he had been working on. Carroll's lawyer, Roberta Kaplan, said in a statement that she would fight the Justice Department filing. The government's claim that Trump was acting in his official capacity as president when he lied about sexually assaulting our client, explaining that she, quote, wasn't his type, is shocking, Kaplan said. And I guess it's shocking in a number of ways, not the least of which is clearly we don't expect it of our presidents to lob insults like that. Although not being Trump's type is not necessarily an insult all by itself, but you get the idea. Kaplan said the Justice Department move came on the deadline for Trump to appeal the state court judge's ruling requiring him to provide evidence. In other words, they waited until the last possible minute. They ran down the clock as far as they could and then decided that they had already cooked up this strategy for, I'm sure, having the DOJ intervene, but they said, why announce that the DOJ wants to intervene now and give them a chance to try and work this thing out on an emergency basis before the election, when we can burn as much clock time as possible by waiting until the deadline to do something about it. So they went ahead and did that. Trump's effort to wield the power of the U.S. government to evade responsibility for his private misconduct is without precedent and shows even more starkly how far he is willing to go to prevent the truth from coming out, Kaplan said. Because Trump was acting officially when he called Carroll a liar, he wasn't, but that's the argument of the DOJ. The U.S. should be substituted for the president as the defendant in the case. So this will now be, now to Mike Musson's point here, they want to turn this into Carroll v. U.S., rather than Carroll v. Trump, saying it was the official policy of the United States government that E. Jean Carroll is a liar and not the government's type, I guess, when she alleged that the U.S. government raped her. It doesn't quite go that far, but the idea here being that he was on the job and acting as president when Donald Trump, the person, uttered those words. That he's, I guess, inextricably linked to the presidency and therefore the government itself. So because Trump was, they say, acting officially when he called Carroll a liar, the U.S. should be substituted for the president as the defendant in the case. A Justice Department team led by where's our sound effect there? Yes, Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Bossert Clark. That's going to be his last work, I think, said in the Tuesday filing, which argued the suit fell under the Federal Tort Claims Act. If approved by a judge, the responsibility for defending the case and paying any judgment would then fall on the U.S. government. Excellent. Really terrible, honestly. The case is Carroll v. United States, U.S. District Court in the Southern District of Manhattan. Okay, so SDNY taking over this one. I don't know who the judge is in this one, but I guess we'll keep an eye on it. It's just really pretty bizarre. Like I said, in light of, for instance, that not being the case when Bill Clinton faced civil suit. I don't know what kind of legs this has to stand on. By the way, I guess one of the other implications is there's like some real gimmitarianism going on here from the DOJ. Traditionally, they have relied in the past on things, well, I guess similar to the OLC memo, which still isn't, a hard and fast rule or law or anything. We just keep referring to it all the time. And I guess it's taking on the patina of law here by being referred to so often that you can't indict or shouldn't indict a sitting president. Of course, this isn't an indictment. This is a civil case, and Clinton had to face civil suit. It was ruled that it had nothing to do with, or certainly couldn't by itself get in the way of his duties as president. But anyway, Trump has frequently argued, and past presidents have also argued that the presidency, and in some cases, like with the George W. Bush administration, the vice presidency, are these unique positions that aren't quite government employee and aren't quite the government itself, and they aren't quite private citizens any of the time. Whatever you need to get out of the suit or to get out of trouble is what they argue, basically. But I will point out that here the contention is that the president was, because he's the president 24/7, and there's like no separation between the president personally and the president in his role as president, and therefore as unitary executive, he is one and the same with the government at all times. That does pose a particular problem, I would say. I mean, if there was honesty and logical consistency, which there's not, it would pose a problem for his leasehold on the old post office building where the Trump Hotel in D.C. is located. The terms of the lease are very clearly spelled out that it's not, the leasehold is not available to government employees. And the argument at the time from the GSA, which made its ludicrous ruling about whether or not the president should even be allowed to retain this lease at all, was, well, the president is unique among the, executive branch or even any governmental figures. He's not an employee. I mean, the terms regulating the lease very clearly say no government employee can do this, but he's not really an employee. He's not president. That's something different and unique. And here, the DOJ, I'm sure the DOJ agreed with that then, because it got them off the hook for taking away the president's lease on the hotel. And who knows what happens after that. But now that it becomes advantageous to be an employee again, because again, the argument that they're making here is that ultimately, like Mike says here, you can't sue employees of the federal government acting as employees for things like defamation. They're just immune from from tort suit in federal law for things like this. So when it comes to holding on to the lease for a allegedly profitable hotel, well, the president's not an employee of the government. When it comes to, well, can we make the DOJ pay for defending him in a libel suit from a private individual about his about his own personal comments about that individual? Yes, because of what an employee he actually is. So this is going to be real interesting to see whether they work it out. They're not going to work it out logically or consistently across the two cases. They're not required to. So they're just going to let it sit at some point. The GSA says what it says, and the DOJ says what it says, and the fact that the two are internally inconsistent isn't going to do anything at all for anybody, unless somebody makes the connection. And then, of course, the question will be, well, who has standing to make that connection? And the answer is, I don't know. I guess somebody who says that they were raped in the hotel by the president might have something there. And who knows? There may already be somebody out there who says that's the case. He's a pervert. And so maybe it could have happened. Okay. Here, right next to it in pocket is the article that I thought might make a good transition. Earlier in the discussion, it occurred to me that it might make a transition. We'll see if I can connect it back to where I was when I had that thought. Before I do, I will note here our Twitter friend Bosin Good here, who says the Carroll v. U.S. suit should be declared a frivolous lawsuit under Federal Rule 11, which would, as I recall, Federal Rule 11 allows you to not only dismiss the suit, but if it's so clearly and obviously frivolous, you can sanction the attorneys who brought the case. But it's almost never works out that way. Rule 11 is hanging out there, but it almost never is brought to bear in this way, at least not resulting in punitive fines or disbarment or any of the other things that can come under Rule 11 for the attorneys who bring it. And they'll never, I don't think, apply that to the DOJ. But again, another weird logical inconsistency that you'll have to overlook in order to get to gain anything from understanding this case and how it progresses. Okay. Yes. Now, what I was thinking about before when I wanted to go to this article was the number of things that we will have to reevaluate post-Trump in terms of how we legislate and whether or not the rule of law means anything under certain circumstances. The number of times we've, for instance, found out that, this is very plainly spelled out as illegal, but it doesn't say what to do if it does happen anyway, because it was just always assumed no one will ever do that because it's been declared illegal, and presidents don't want to be caught doing things that have been declared illegal. This one does and doesn't care. One other area we'll have to reevaluate things. And then in this one too, not only reevaluating the presumptions of law that are available to the government and presidents, like the ones we mentioned earlier today. We've mentioned earlier in the show, weeks and months ago, that it would be wise to reevaluate the basis of the OLC memo. Because, of course, that was all drafted on the argument that one of the reasons that the president couldn't and shouldn't be subject to criminal indictment while serving as president is that it would be, one, a separation of powers issue, which I guess still remains a possibility, and two, that it would distract the president dangerously and unnecessarily from his very important daily duties in the areas of national security and elsewhere. But this is a president who, unique among presidents, has shirked that responsibility at every opportunity. And so the likelihood of actually distracting him from important work is near zero. So in a situation like that, why not go forward with a criminal case? Haven't convinced anybody on that one, but as soon as there's a Democrat in the same situation, I think you'll see just how sound that theory really is. Anyway, The Atlantic has yet another piece from The Atlantic. We're going to be going to them left and right these days. Just yesterday, Larry Diamond, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, not a place I ordinarily would lean on, and Edward B. Foley, professor of law at the Ohio State University. You know how they love to say that. I don't know if the law faculty says it as often as the football players do, but the terrifying inadequacy of American election law is the subject of their piece. Actually, it's the title of their piece. The country has narrowly averted catastrophic deadlocks over the presidential election outcome before. We may not be so fortunate in 2020. So it's kind of a shift in focus. They're looking forward, looking ahead. I don't think they're eagerly anticipating, but looking ahead to things going terribly wrong in settling the question of the election. And a lot of people are worried about this. So this is one of those nightmare scenario pieces. But the headline, anyway, hints at a broader issue that not only can these lunatics manipulate law long enough to delay things such that they think people will get frustrated and say, just let's keep the stupid president that we have now, or whatever they think people might react. But that there are so many exploitable loopholes that when they come around and get exploited, everyone will say, this was never intended to be like this. I can't believe we didn't anticipate it. Well, here they are anticipating it. What are we going to do about it? We'll bite our fingernails while they anticipate it. Merely voting and counting the votes in this year's election will be an extraordinary challenge. Coronavirus, mail-in ballots, etc. The country faces the worst public health crisis in a century, a potentially severe shortage of poll workers because of that health crisis, mail-in voting on an unprecedented scale, mounting functional problems at the U.S. Postal Service, with many alleging a plot to undermine voting by mail, and a president already dismissing mail-in voting as fraud-ridden. And he'll dismiss in-person voting as fraud-ridden if need be as well. And all of this is taking place in one of the worst climates of partisan polarization and distrust in American history. To say that this threatens American democracy is no overstatement. An additional factor could whip these variables into an outright constitutional crisis. Hooray! One in which both Donald Trump and Joe Biden would claim to have been elected president, undertaking rival preparations for inauguration on January 20th. The country's laws on presidential elections provide a shockingly inadequate guide for resolving an electoral college dispute. Twice in the past century and a half, in 1876 and 2000, the country narrowly averted a catastrophic deadlock over the presidential election outcome. We may not be so fortunate in 2020. And that's not even to say anything about the disputes in 2004 that went ignored, just as the dispute of 2000 went ignored on the floor of the House during the Electoral College vote count in Congress, or the objections that went ignored in the 2016 electoral vote count on the floor of the House. they're really not inclined to take things up at those junctures. But that was, I think, pretty clear illustration in modern times of how easy it is to identify a potentially catastrophic problem with the Electoral College count and still not get a resolution. But they cast a broader net here, going back to 1876. So, okay, further exploration of this on the other side after we come back from this 2-minute break. We'll set the scene for you again and then run all the way through it. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Roots Radio. Are you ready to be terrified by the inadequacy of American election law? Setting the stage once again, just a reminder of the various times during which we have come precariously close to having a constitutional crisis over who is going to be the president. We now have a situation where this may arise again. And by the way, even without actually fulfilling I haven't read all the way through the article, but even without fulfilling the criteria that the two authors are likely to use to justify claiming that there could be such a crisis, you may still find two people claiming to be president. One, Joe Biden, claiming to be president because he will have won the popular vote in enough states, holding enough electoral votes that he would easily clear the 270 electoral vote threshold. And Donald Trump claiming the same because it doesn't hurt him at all to just stand around and claim to be the president. Some people will actually believe it. And if he can delay for long enough, I guess like I said, he may think that some people will just throw their hands up and say, oh, who can tell? They're both claiming to be president. And look, isn't the easier outcome just to let the guy who's president now continue to be president and not pay so much money for moving boxes in and out of the White House? After all, if everybody just stays exactly where they are and the status quo, everyone loves status quo, right? Why don't we just go with that? I don't know exactly what he thinks is going to be the outcome from something like that, except that if he delays and delays and delays and can delay for several years, then he ends up serving out the term. I don't know. I don't really know what's going on in his head. But they lay out a somewhat more realistic scenario in that they'll come up with ways to actually muddy the waters that Trump might use to explain the discrepancy in electoral votes. Whereas I'm also pointing out that he could just claim it. There's nothing stopping him from doing that. And again, the terrifying inadequacy of election law and every other law that we've got is that we don't really have anything in place for what to do if somebody just stands there and says, I'm the president, even if it's not Donald Trump. Like, what do we do if Vermin Supreme stands outside and says, I'm the president, and enough Secret Service agents are willing to say, look, I don't know, it's not up to me to decide. The guy says he's president, and we got our, if the head of the Secret Service says protect him, we'll protect him. So I don't make any judgment about these things. That's the only thing that stands in between the two claims is the approval of somebody somewhere. And with all these prominent people taking on QAnon beliefs and swearing their allegiance to QAnon, whoever or whatever that may be, I suppose that's no crazier than the possibility of Vermin Supreme convincing people that he's the president with or without that boot on his head. Anyway, so where were we? Yes. An additional factor could whip these variables into an outright constitutional crisis, one in which both Donald Trump and Joe Biden would claim to have been elected president. Remember, that's the scenario. And they mentioned the past scenarios in which there were near crises. Although multiple possible scenarios for a post-election crisis exist, the most plausible one will revolve, in their minds anyway, will revolve around how long counting the votes in closely contested states might take. Remember, those 3 states that by a total margin of 87,000 votes gave Trump an electoral college victory in 2016, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Well, they'll all, again, be hotly contested in 2020, depending on whether or not you believe the first hour of the show, anyway. But in addition to a few other states, such as Florida and North Carolina, which will also likely be hotly contested, the election result could ride on who wins 1 or 2 of these states, as it did in 2000. Caveat here is Armando's reminder that Florida is, I guess, I don't know whether alone among states or alone among the states that are considered ahead of time to be most likely to be the crucial in making the call about who has won the presidency. They are permitted to count the ballots they've received by mail and whatever other valid delivery systems they recognize ahead of time, such that they won't be asking for extra time to count those ballots post-election day, post-closure of the polls on election day. They'll have the better part of that count in hand before the polls close, and then they'll be able to count the day of live voting pretty quickly as well. Whether they can do it accurately or not is a different question. But that Florida likely won't suffer from the same anticipated delays, days and days of delays for counting counting votes not cast in person. And if Armando is right, that'll likely mean that they can make the call on Florida and make it early enough so that, along with the other states that are able to make their calls, if there are any, I mean, maybe Florida just stands there all by itself, but taking Florida out of play in terms of doubt could, it turns out, result in a pretty reliable call much earlier than people are anticipating when they're dreaming up nightmare scenarios. So, with that caveat out there, we have this set up from our authors. The election result could ride on who wins 1 or 2 of these states, and if one of them is Florida, then it rides, and it's all fine, just as it did in 2000. Though it would be ironic if it was Florida all over again. Imagine that the presidential race in these states is still not clearly decided when, on December 8th, the federal safe harbor period closes. Remember all this rising out of the Bush v. Gore episode. The safe harbor period closes and states must certify who has garnered their electoral votes. So December 8th is, I guess, the end of the line for states to figure out which electoral slates they're going to send to Washington, whether there's doubt or not. Some mail-in ballots could remain to be counted at that point, or disputes might persist about the validity of some ballots. Perhaps after trailing on election night, Biden has come from behind to take the lead as the mail-in ballots are counted. Following Trump's warnings, Republicans might claim fraud. Or perhaps controversy arises over how closely the signatures on mail-in ballots match those in the voter registration database. Pretty subjective, right? Then what? I mean, you can dispute them, right? I mean, and again, keep in mind, please, that they could sit there and look at the signatures in the elections office, and they could be obviously, objectively identical to every normal person's eye, even to the eye of the Republican representative who's on hand to offer their side's view of whether or not the signatures match. And there's nothing that says that the Republican can't say, I don't think they match, even when everybody can see that they match, and on any other day of the week the Republican would readily agree that they match. He's just, what do you do if you get someone who sits there and just says, I'm just going to say no to every single one? Again, the inadequacy of our laws. He's entitled to say that he believes it. It might be stupid. He may not be able to prove it. But what do we do if he just insists on saying it? You can't just hit him over the head with a judge's gavel and say, you don't get to talk anymore. So we have a problem. Then what? Right? Some have speculated that confusion will reign to the point that, under the 12th Amendment, ratified in 1804, the president will be elected by the House, with each state delegation, as we've gone over before, casting one vote, and the vice president selected by the Senate. The much more likely scenario, they say, however, is that partisan politics will drive decisions in each state, and quite possibly dueling decisions in some states. In Florida, just to return there, Republicans hold both the legislature and the governorship. At least they could probably agree on whom to declare the winner, although the courts might step in with a divergent answer. But in Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, the legislatures are Republican and the governors are Democrats. In any of these states, a close election with an unresolved outcome could produce a scenario in which the state legislature certifies Trump's electors and the governor certifies Biden's electors. And both candidates claim to have been elected president. Remember the mechanics of the way the Electoral College process works. One, that we're not actually voting directly for president and vice president, but technically speaking, and in some states you'll see this right on the ballot, electors for those candidates. And then whoever wins the popular vote for the electors, that is, in each state, they are dispatched to the state capitol on the appointed day and cast their electoral votes for whoever won the popular vote in that state, or in the couple of states that split their votes. We'll leave them out of the discussion for the moment, even though one of them is Maine, and there are mighty fine people up there who would love to discuss it with you, just not now. And then they certify those results. The appropriate authorities in each state certify that, yes, the vote took place in regular form, and we determined who the electors were, and they came here and they cast these votes, and I saw them do it, and here are the certificates, and off to the Secretary of the U.S. Senate, and then the joint session of Congress in which the votes are opened and tallied, and they're read out, and the clerk reads that the certificates appear to be authentic and regular in form. Perhaps if you've ever seen Fahrenheit 9/11 or ever watched the electoral votes being counted at all, you might recognize the phrasing. So what does it mean for them to be genuine and regular in form? That the responsible state authorities certify that everything's A-OK. So what do you do if you get two things in which responsible-ish state authorities claim that everything is A-OK and regular in form and order, but one says Trump and one says Biden? Well, that would be a question for the assembled Congress to determine, I guess. And I don't know exactly how that decision gets made. If it's not the question under the 12th Amendment of who gets to be president yet, but whether or not, or which of these two slates to accept from, we'll stick with Florida here, even though there's no reason to believe that the governor and legislature would disagree. But yeah, I mean, of course, then there'll be the question of which one. There can't be two authorities from which accepting slates of electors would be proper, right? Or would Congress then have to look at what does state law say about who gets to declare that the electoral vote is properly certified? I suppose you could do that. And I suppose there's a good possibility that each state is actually clear about such things, but I'm not entirely sure how it would go. And I guess where the legislature and governorship are in different hands. There could certainly be disputes. And I don't know. I'm not certain that every state handles it the same because, of course, the federal constitution reserves, for the most part, to the states the ability to determine how its elections are held and how they're certified. Some states certify their results by a secretary of state, some at the recommendation of an elections authority, but certified by the governor, I guess, and some by the legislature. And I would think that in most cases that the governor's signature would do it. But again, the federal constitution reserves to the state legislatures the right to determine how those elections are held, so that even if current state law says the governor has the ability to, or is ministerially responsible for signing the certificates, the legislature in theory could say the federal constitution gives us the power to decide how we'll allocate our electoral votes, and we change our minds now. From now on, state law will say that the legislature certifies such things, and that's in Republican hands, and we're going to certify a different winner. What if the governor vetoes that legislation? I don't know. What does the governor have the ability to do that if the federal constitution says state legislatures have this power? Is it subject to veto? It's a question that would take a while to settle, I guess, in court. Not necessarily because it's a hard question, but because it's paperwork and we're going to have to do it. So who knows? But it's a pretty big problem. So that's how you could get two slates of electors showing up. And then it's a question of what do you do with that? If this happens, our authors now continue, the situation will be so much worse than a Bush v. Gore, which ended the contest over the 2000 election in December, long before it risked engulfing the nation in two conflicting claims to the presidency on January 20th. And close readers of Bush v. Gore will, I think, recognize in there the desperation of some of the Supreme Court justices to do that it was very clearly their priority to avoid risking engulfing the nation in two conflicting claims come January 20th. That they thought, despite the damage that this decision may do even long term to the reputation of the Supreme Court, it's worth it if we avoid a protracted battle that leaves us on January 20th, Inauguration Day, still scratching our heads and fighting. That would be the worst thing that could happen in their minds. I don't know if they would still think so. It could be even worse than the Hayes-Tilden election of 1876. No one wants that, right? Does anyone remember it? Let's find out about it. Which was settled 2 days before the inauguration. I don't believe I ever learned that in history class. No, we didn't learn much about Hayes at all. His name was Rutherford B. Hayes, and that's it. That's what I know about him. And he looks like the guy in the Smith Brothers cough drop box. That was a close call. Much too close for comfort, say the authors, but a last-minute compromise, which ended Reconstruction, by the way, small compromise, right? Averted outgoing President Ulysses S. Grant's biggest nightmare, the threat of two simultaneous inauguration ceremonies, and thus two commanders-in-chief demanding allegiance from the Army's generals. Yikes, because we just had that. Could such a nightmare really occur this time, made all the worse by the deeply sobering necessity for America's 21st century military might and its nuclear launch codes to be under the control of one true commander-in-chief at all times? Well, I think we've gotten past that. I mean, they're currently under the control of Donald Trump, who's not the one true commander-in-chief at any time. So I suppose we've gotten used to that part of it. Additionally, the possibility of civil unrest swirling around two separate inaugurations is all the more frightening when one considers the weaponry in the hands of private militias, which could be deployed amid mass demonstrations attempting to influence the contest for power. It would, in fact, be a mess. The 20th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1933, was supposed to protect against such possibilities. Guess what? We missed the mark on that. It unambiguously ends a presidential term and begins a new one at noon on January 20th. Mix those two up and put it into June, and that may happen. The Constitution does not allow any gap in commander-in-chief authority whatsoever. We're just going to have to invent one, I guess. Even more relevant, the 20th Amendment provides for an acting president. That's right, but you didn't know that. An acting president. Let's see. If there is no president-elect when the new term begins, save for the extremely unlikely scenario of a new vice president being elected by the Senate, but not a new president by the House, the acting president, under the 1947 presidential succession law, would be the Speaker of the House, who would then be required to resign from Congress. She would exercise the full powers of the commander-in-chief unless and until the election controversy was resolved. But that resolution would take effect only if there were no president-elect. What happens if there is one? And what, in fact, if there are two? The 12th Amendment requires that the electors, after meeting and voting in each state, send their electoral college votes to the President of the Senate, who is still, of course, at that time, the incumbent Vice President of the United States, said to be Mike Pence. The trouble is that in some states, Biden and Trump electors might hold separate meetings on the same day and send in separate submissions, as the Hayes and Tilden electors did in 1876. After the electors send in their votes, the 12th Amendment then provides for a special joint session of Congress on January 6th, at which the President of the Senate is to open all the certificates of electoral votes sent from the states, and the votes shall then be counted. The problem with this formulation, as is likely obvious to many readers, is its use of the passive voice. And that's always a problem. The amendment doesn't say exactly who counts the electoral votes in this joint session of Congress, whether it's Congress as a whole, the Senate President, or some other actor. As was noticed in the 1830s by Justice Joseph Story in his Commentaries on the Constitution, this phrasing leaves, this is a new one on me, this phrasing leaves a dangerous ambiguity if the counting of the electoral votes were to be seriously disputed when Congress convened one of these joint sessions. As you're probably following here, if there's sent addressed to the President of the Senate, and that's Mike Pence, and then it just says the electoral vote has to be counted but doesn't say who, Mike Pence could say, I count it. I'm the President of the Senate, and I don't have to show it to you, but it says I won. Or I'm not counting these ones that say Biden won. When there's a dispute, I decide which ones to count. These are the electoral votes, and those are counterfeits. And that would likely be disputed by the Congress, but who knows where that goes? Why not just say, I counted them, and I'm entitled to do so. It says they're sent to me. These are mine. You know, if they thought all the PPE belonged to them, why can't Mike Pence say these all belong to me as well? Why not? I know, two different things, but so what? Logic? Consistency? Who cares? All right. Well, let's see. Where do we leave off? This is precisely what happened when Congress deadlocked over the Hayes-Tilden dispute. The Senate wanted Hayes, the House wanted Tilden, and the Constitution provided no tiebreaker. The fight went down to the wire. Yes, the last-minute bargain averted the calamity of two simultaneous inauguration ceremonies, but it also consigned African Americans in the South to another century of subjugation. That feels like a bad outcome. But we did it anyway. A decade later, Congress passed the Electoral Count Act of 1887. With another potentially close election fast approaching, they actually took care of this ahead of time. It's amazing. Congress wanted additional procedures in place. I can't believe they got that done. They knew that the compromise they cobbled together in the act was flawed. A leading political scientist of the day called it almost unintelligible. We defy anyone to read its operative section, it's linked here, a morass of contorted syntax, and profess to truly understand its meaning with respect to the circumstance when it would matter most, if Congress were to receive more than one submission of electoral votes from the same state, and the Senate and the House on January 6th disagreed on which submission to accept as valid. In that event, and I guess that's what they would have to do, you don't really vote in a joint session. They don't do that. That's not a voting body. So I guess a joint session let's say, if the president of the Senate even acknowledges that a second set of votes has come in, they would, I guess, retire to their respective houses, reconvene, and vote on which ones to accept. And if the House says accept Biden's, and if the Senate says accept Trump's, you're not going to work that one out in conference committee. What's going to happen? So apparently the Electoral Count Act says what's going to happen, but no one can understand it. Maybe we should read its operative section, or you should off the air if we don't get to it. So what happens if they just disagree on which submission to accept? In that event, under one interpretation of the 1887 statute, the electoral votes would go to the slate of electors backed by the state's governor. However, given the impenetrability of the statute's wording, other interpretations, which have some support in the scholarly literature on the topic, and it wouldn't matter even if they didn't, if Trump would just argue it anyway if it helps him, it would give authority to the Senate president to dictate a different outcome in certain situations. Just dictate it. In the current circumstance, this would entail the sitting vice president, Mike Pence, deciding whether he and his running mate had been reelected, which, whatever the legal reasoning for this process, would be a disaster for the outcome's legitimacy. Conversely, Speaker Nancy Pelosi might assert that the electoral votes backed by a given Democratic governor must be counted based on the interpretation of the statute that makes the governor's certification the tiebreaker when two houses of Congress disagree on which set of the state's electoral votes to accept. How to break this deadlock? The 1887 statute says that a joint session cannot consider the electoral votes of the next state alphabetically until the dispute over the one in question is resolved. Speaker Pelosi could therefore declare that the counting of electoral votes, and thus the presidential election itself, would remain incomplete unless and until the Senate president, who, after Pence's term ends without a new vice president, would be the Senate's president pro tempore. And, just suspend things until the new Senate president accepts the governor's submission from a disputed state, which would, of course, elect Biden president. While still in office, however, Pence could point to separate sections of the same statute that give him the power to preserve order and move the proceedings along so that they can be completed in time for the inauguration and to take place as scheduled. Wow. In this way, January 20th could arrive with Vice President Pence insisting that President Trump has been reelected to a second term, while at the same time Speaker Pelosi insists that there is no president-elect because the process remains deadlocked, and hence she will assume the role of acting president until the counting of electoral votes from the states resumes, with the disputed state resolved in favor of the governor's submission. Phew! The Supreme Court might ultimately decide the issue days before the inauguration, with riotous waves of rival mass demonstrations demanding justice for their respective parties. The public might not, unlike 2000, accept the court's view, and any court decision could result in civic unrest on either side, or worse. But there is no guarantee that the court would intervene at all. Unlike Bush v. Gore, which involved claims at a much earlier stage of the electoral process, before the electors met that year and before the election reached Congress, a dispute over who is commander-in-chief that arises because of a congressional deadlock might be viewed by the court as an inherently political question beyond judicial power, which is amazing because, of course, it will just have been demonstrated that there's no political solution to it. In that event, who ought to be obeyed as commander-in-chief starting at noon on January 20th? A re-elected President Trump or an acting President Pelosi? The best time to act to avert this disastrous scenario is, now. Well before the November election. Of course, earlier would have been better. The sooner preventive steps are taken, the easier it is to separate them from immediate partisan calculations. In particular, two important steps can be taken immediately. Not that that will actually help separate them from partisanship. It's too late for that. One good idea advanced by Senator Marco Rubio, I guess that's it for Marco Rubio, is to give states 3.5 more weeks to count their popular vote and resolve any disputes. That may or may not help. He has introduced a bill that would extend the federal safe harbor deadline for certifying elections from December 8th to January 1st. That would reduce the chances, anyway, of a state submitting two conflicting slates of electoral votes if they wanted to do so honestly, I would add. But if they just wanted to do it dishonestly, it's no help at all. Second, we support the idea of a bipartisan commission, oh boy, to help guide the resolution of a dispute if the joint session of Congress becomes deadlocked during the 2 weeks between January 6th and the 20th. The bipartisan commission could emerge from a civil society or be a creation of Congress. But its membership would need to be persuasive to a divided Congress in need of guidance, which would be much more likely if it were appointed by Congress. Moreover, if congressional Republican and Democratic leaders could agree on the structure and composition of such a commission, which they couldn't, even if its writ were purely advisory, that agreement could ease the intense atmosphere of anxiety and animosity that suffuses the election. That's a pipe dream. Forget that. One more paragraph. The scenarios we've sketched here may seem improbable, so do your solutions, but they are too risky to ignore. But we'll do it anyway. Better to create the commission now and have it be unnecessary than to have January arrive with it needed but non-existent. And better in this uniquely challenging election year to give the states more time to count and certify their votes than to rush the electoral process at the risk of gravely damaging its legitimacy and that of our entire democratic system. Well, I'm not going to stand here any longer and have you badmouth the system. Gentlemen.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Okay, well, true enough, there was a scary situation. Their solution's not particularly believable, though. I'll tell you what is believable. What's believable is that you're going to stay tuned right here on Netroots Radio for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy and Justice Putnam's roundup of the important news of the day coming up next